Hello everybody, welcome back to Bentley House. I'm Ara and welcome to the fourth video for Addams October. As you probably saw in the title, I am making Morticia and Gomez today, and I'm actually remaking Morticia. I made this Morticia doll years ago. She's okay. She's got some flaws, and I definitely want to remake her now that I am starting to use doll kits. I feel like they're a lot more refined and in scale. This one I hand sculpted. I had no idea how to make clothing, so I just wrapped ribbon around her body. But today I'm going to be remaking her using a kit from Sandra Stacy. Sandra Stacy is the person whose kits I've been using for each and every doll, so I feel like they're pretty cohesive. This is the kit for Morticia, and I really like this kit because her head can move, and I think only Morticia's kit and Wednesday's kits have moving heads. I'm also going to be making Gomez today. This is a 2-for-1 deal. I'm making two dolls in one video. So this is Gomez's kit, and so I'm going to be putting these together today. I will make sure to put Sandra Stacy's information in the description box below. I'm not going to be doing a super extensive tutorial on Gomez because I'm going to be using a lot of the same techniques and patterns that I used for Lurch. They're both wearing suits, and so I'm just going to be kind of changing the pattern to fit what I want Gomez's suit to look like, but it's very much the same process. You just kind of have to fit it to each doll. This is the doll put together. If you do end up using a porcelain doll kit, make sure to put your doll together the way that the person who made the kit instructs you to do so. Before I can add the clothes, I'm going to go ahead and use black paint to paint the socks and shoes, and I don't show it on camera. I do use polyacrylic to make sure that the shoes look nice and shiny. Gomez is always very well dressed. Once that's done and drying, I need to work on the face. Now, these kits came pre-painted, and I was looking mainly for face molds that I felt would fit the character. And so I knew from the beginning I would have to repaint over some of the already painted faces. For example, on this doll, he had quite heavy eyelashes and quite heavy dark liner at the bottom of the eyes, and so I knew a lot of that would have to go. He also had brown eyebrows, so I needed to paint over that with black. Gomez tends to have a darker, more tan complexion, and so I knew I needed to add some of that in, and he has just very dark features in general. In order to get rid of some of the eyelashes, I tried to match the skin tone, which is incredibly difficult, but I mixed paint to match the skin tone as best as I could, and then later on I will go back with some chalk pastel and I will kind of blend it all in to the face. I also decided to use that same skin tone color to get rid of the bottom heavy black line and just kind of make his eye look a little bit smaller. Originally, I did think that I was going to try and make a mustache out of viscose, which is the material that I've used for hair for the dolls in the past, but I did want to paint on the mustache first with acrylic paint. Once I had painted it on with the acrylic paint, I thought it looked pretty good, and so I didn't want to mess it up by trying to use the real viscose fibers. So I just left his mustache painted on. In the reference photo I was looking at, his mustache is fairly thin, so I figured this would be okay. While I do dearly, dearly love John Astin's portrayal of Gomez in the TV show, I think I just had to go with Raul Julia's performance of Gomez. He's just so romantic and kind of over the top, sweep you off your feet type of Gomez, so that's the one I decided to model my Gomez off of. What you're seeing me do right now is what I mentioned before. I'm using some chalk pastel to kind of blend in the skin tone that I put on the face earlier with the rest of the face, and then I'm going back with some black chalk pastel to make the areas around the eyes a little bit darker. I'm also going to do that just inside the ears and also a little bit along the jawline to accentuate the jaw. Also on all these dolls, I've just lightly put little nostrils in. I think that helps a little bit with the realism. And finally, this is where the doll comes alive. I'm going to add some brown paint for his, is it irises? Is that the part that's colored? And then some black paint for the pupils, and it ends up that the black paint kind of overtakes the brown paint, but when it's this small, it's okay. So here is his finished face, and I actually really like how it came out. Now when I was searching for fabric for his outfit, I could not find anything pinstriped in the correct scale. So I realized I was going to have to pinstripe it myself. So it's literally pinstriped. I'm taking a white gel pen, this is a white Jelly Roll gel pen, and some black fabric, and I'm just taking a ruler and making really long, straight lines to create the pinstripe. Once I have all the painting done, I have my fabric pinstriped, I can start putting together his outfit. I started with the pants, and then I put on a faux shirt. Then I added the arms for the jacket, and then the rest of the jacket on top. And I'm interrupting the video right now because I swear I saw his expression change. He like smiled. I'm completely serious. And I think this is why miniaturists are portrayed as a little crazy in media at times. So I think after the Addams Family dolls are all created, I need to take a break from dolls, because it's always the dolls. It's the dolls that drive the spook when it comes to spooky stories around miniaturists. So anyway, now it's time to wig him. Before I wig him, I decided I wanted to give him a bow tie. This is something I forgot to do for Lurch and need to go back to do, but I thought I'd show you how I make a very simple bow tie. I am taking a very thin strip of this red material, and I'm going to use this to make my bow tie. I want it to be about as wide as I want the bow tie to be. I'm going to take some glue and fray check both sides of the fabric. Because it's so small, I don't want to have to hem the long side, so I'm just fray checking him with some glue. Now I am going to hem the two shorter sides of the rectangle, so I'm just going to take a little bit of glue, add it to the side, and carefully fold it over with the tip of my finger. This is my little mini iron. It's a Clover brand mini iron. I'll put a link down below if you're interested, but it's really helpful in pressing those little tiny seams. Now I'm going to make another skinnier strip of red fabric, and that's going to be the middle of my bow tie. Before I add that on, I'm going to take the first piece that we created and I'm going to twist it in the middle to help create the bow tie shape. And when I'm happy with how it looks, I'm going to hit it with the iron so that it stays in place. Then I can add a little dab of glue in the center and then put the skinnier piece of fabric on top. I'm going to let that dry for a little bit just so that it takes hold and it's not sliding around. And once that is a little bit dry, I can cut off any of the excess material, and then I'm going to add some more glue and wrap those really tiny little pieces of fabric around to create the center part of the bow tie. This is more easily done with a toothpick than with your fingers. Once the bow tie is complete, I'm going to just apply it to the front of his shirt. I think this gives a nice pop of red color, and because Morticia has red lips and red fingernails, I think it's going to be a nice accent to her as well. Once he's ready for wigging, I'm going to cover him in a sandwich bag. This just protects the clothes that we just finished from any drips or spills from glue. And then I'm going to take some black viscose, and this is what I used all those years ago to wig my first Morticia doll, and it just lasts forever because these dolls are so tiny. I just have this one picture of him during the wigging process because, again, it was very similar to Lurch's process. You can check out that video if you like. But here is Gomez, all dressed up with his hair ready to go. But of course, I cannot make Gomez without making Morticia. Obviously, that would be pure torture for him.
To live without you, only that would be torture.
A day alone, only that would be death. Knock it off.
So now it is time to redo my Morticia doll, so she's a little bit more refined and put together like my now Gomez doll. Now the thing about doing dolls like these, they don't bend very easily. You can bend them, you can try to pose them, but if they're made in a standing position, they tend to look awkward when you put them in a sitting position. Now Morticia is known for sitting in her peacock chair, which I am having someone make a real miniature peacock chair for me right now, which I'm so excited. But I need to have Morticia where she can sit and still look elegant and natural, like she was made to be in a sitting position. So I need to be a little bit inventive, and I was inspired by this doll. This is my Sally doll from Nightmare Before Christmas. I did a project on this a while ago. She actually has two bottom halves of her body. One of her well-known scenes in that movie, she is actually sitting on the ground, and so the doll makers decided, instead of trying to make her where she could bend enough to get into that position, they just decided to make two halves of her body so that you could do that. So I'm going to do a similar thing with that today. Now I did give her a little modesty here, but I put her together according to Sandra's instructions, and usually I would add the legs, and this kit comes with bare feet. But I am not going to be using these, so I will save them for a later project. So what I'm going to be doing now is I am going to be creating two bottom halves for this doll that are interchangeable. I'm going to be sculpting them out of polymer clay and baking them, and I really don't even have to make legs because honestly you never see that Morticia even has really two legs. I mean, for all we know, she could be a mermaid under there. We don't know. So I am going to be creating just two shapes that look as though there are two legs together. And I'm making the same shape out of aluminum foil, and then one of them I'm bending into a sitting shape. Then I'm going to take some polymer clay. Doesn't really matter what color it is because I'm going to paint it all black, although it did end up some of the paint scratches off if I use it quite a bit. So if you do try this, I would definitely go for the black. But all I'm going to do is take these shapes that I created in aluminum foil, and I'm going to wrap them in a thin sheet of polymer clay. Using the polymer clay is going to allow me to bake this so that I know that it is sturdy and going to last for years to come. I'm going to do this for both the standing set of legs and the sitting set of legs. And the sitting set, I decided not to even make feet. It's just going to kind of like ghosts where they just trail off into nothingness, because when she's sitting, she doesn't really need feet. The bottom of her dress will kind of cover that. Before I bake the clay, I'm just going to make sure and shove both pieces kind of up into the ceramic body cavity so that I know that those pieces are going to fit together really well when I'm trying to exchange her legs out. So once I have the sitting and standing pieces, I just smooth them out and bake them, and also make sure, compared to Gomez, she's about the right height. In some versions she's taller than him, some versions she's shorter. It's just really up to what I made them about the same height in this project. Now I'm going to paint these pieces. Again, I probably should have made it out of black clay, but I just went with a color I don't normally use very much. And this is so when I actually make her dress, there won't be any bright colors shining through. I'm not quite sure how see-through the fabric is going to be, especially since her dress is going to stretch. And now you can see how everything fits together. So now comes the difficult part of trying to figure out how to make a dress that will work with changing out her body, because Morticia's dress is typically all one long piece, and so it would be really difficult to make two halves of a dress that still gives the correct look of what her dress should be. For her face, I really didn't feel like I had to do much. I kind of like, she has like half lowered eyelids, and she kind of has the voluptuous look to her. So all I really did was I took some white chalk pastel, and you didn't see this on camera because my hands were out of the way, but I just kind of lightened up her complexion because Morticia is supposed to be really pale. I then added some dark eyeshadow, just darkened that up, and I may even darken it some more in the future. Looking at her now, I don't truly feel like her eye, it's dark enough around her eyes, but I can kind of play with that as I go. And then for her lips, I made them redder, and then I also extended them just a little bit. With the same red that I used for her lips, I made sure to paint her fingernails. She's always depicted as having some very bright red fingernails, so I wanted to make sure and put that in. These are very tiny fingers, by the way. That was a little nerve-wracking. Now I'm going to be creating the custom pattern for her dress, and I'm using muslin to try and get the pattern, and this doesn't work well for a few reasons. The muslin does not stretch, and it also frays very easily. So it was a good way to get an initial idea of whether or not these shapes would work, but it really wasn't going to stretch and move like the final dress that I wanted to create. But I went ahead and I used some glue, and I used my iron to set the seams to create this first practice dress. Once that was done, I could flip it inside out and go ahead and try it on Morticia's body. And again, like I said, this is going to fray and it does not stretch, so I do end up making this whole practice dress again in spandex. And I just kind of happened to accidentally find some spandex and think, maybe I should take this and see if it works, and it really did. So yeah, keep that in mind if you're making a Morticia doll. So on the practice dress, I did realize that if I wanted to be able to change her legs, I would have to cut a slit up the back of the dress, and then I had to start brainstorming some ideas on how I would open and close that part of the dress. Here is the spandex that I've decided to go ahead and try and make the practice dress out of again. And I'm going to use my original pattern, but this time I am going to go ahead and add the trumpet flare to the bottom of her dress. Her dress is famous for having that large amount of material that kind of goes around her feet. And so I wanted to start playing with that. So here is the practice dress on, and here's a few things I realized. I definitely did have to enclose the back around the ankles because otherwise it would just flare out. The spandex doesn't like to bend and stay in place. And the glue and iron technique was not going to work at all. It pulled apart and it just did not want to stay glued. So I quickly realized that I am actually going to have to hand sew this dress together. Now I probably could use a machine, but I really didn't trust it to make small enough stitches so that everything stayed together. I can sew a little bit. I know what a back stitch is, and that's what I did all along the sides of the dress, especially since this would be stretching. I wanted to make sure to do a really good job with the stitching so that everything stayed together. One really nice thing I learned about spandex also is that it does not fray, and so I did not have to fray check or put stitches around the unfinished ends. It doesn't fray. So I'm going to have to keep this in mind for any dolls I make in the future, texture, if possible, spandex is not a bad choice, and it makes it a lot easier to get on and off of your dolls, because unlike humans, porcelain dolls do not bend or stretch, and it's very difficult to get clothing on and off of them. So here's how the initial fitting goes, and so far I like how it is looking, and so I think this is going to be the piece that I go with. I'm going to go ahead and make a line that's going to be the slit up the back of the dress. This is what's going to make it easier for the legs to go in and out, so I can change her sitting or standing position. Here I'm just going to check and make sure her legs work and that I like how the dress fits on her body. And in the end, I think I end up liking how it looks. It is a little bit looser than I was hoping it would be, but all in all, for where I started years ago with my initial Morticia, I think this is definitely an improvement for sure. And here is the sitting position with her sitting set of legs in the dress, and I like how that looks as well. For the top of the dress, I decided I needed to add a little bit more of a V-neck. She always tends to have a little bit of a deeper V-neck than the one I created, but I just wanted to have a slight V-neck. And so I did a little bit of a snip in the top of the dress and then just folded it over, and this too I ended up hand sewing so that I could make it look the way that I wanted it to look. Here's the V that ended up being at the top of the dress. So now I have to tackle the closure in the back, and what I decided to do for this is some black hook and eye findings. And I'm just going to hand sew once again those on. This project ended up taking quite a while just because of the sewing, but in the end I think it was definitely worth it. So you can see that first hook and eye on there, and all those little white dots were just telling me where to put the rest of them. Now this may seem like a lot for the back of the dress, but I actually really like it. I think it makes kind of a cool detail to an otherwise pretty plain dress. Once I had all the sewing and all the details added, I could go ahead and attach the dress to her upper body, and I decided to use super glue because what I found out earlier was that tacky glue was not going to work, but this Gorilla Gel super glue that I used worked really well. So well that you really had to work quickly or else you'd get it glued in the wrong spot. Now that her bodice is in place, I can go ahead and work on the sleeves. Her sleeves are usually shown as being very skinny on her arm, and then they get a lot bigger towards the wrists. So that's what I'm trying to do in my pattern. I go ahead and just kind of draw what I want them to look like in profile around her arm. And then I folded that over the longest line and then made like a second, like a copy. I don't know sewing terms. Anyway, I doubled it so that it could fold over the top of her arm like you see in the video. This way I only have to put one seam on the underside of her arm, and again I'm going to hand sew that together. Then I can flip it inside out and test it on her arm. And again, because it's spandex, it was so easy to dress her. This would have been a nightmare to try and get a skinny sleeve onto a doll if it was not a stretching material. So this turned out to be such a great way to do her dress. Now with the spandex, I did realize that the fabric kind of has a mind of its own when it comes to draping, so I did have to work on that a bit. And I do have the sleeves where they continue across her back, and it does make it look a little bit like she's got a jacket on, but honestly her hair is so long in the end you don't notice. This is some black cloth that I ended up getting from the dollar store. Her dress sometimes looks like it has like strings or raggedy pieces hanging down from the wrists and at the very bottom of her dress. So I wanted to kind of emulate that look with these stringy pieces of the fabric. So I haven't glued her sleeves on. I'm just going to open them up and add some glue on the very bottom. Then I can take a piece of the mesh cloth that I had cut, and I'm going to put it on top of the glue and just kind of make sure that it sits into the glue. Now I know that if the glue didn't work great at the seams, but there should be no pressure or weight on these strings, so I'm not really worried about these coming undone. It should be okay. And this is how these end up looking. It's not a perfect solution, but I think it gives the effect that I'm going for. Now that I'm happy with the sleeves, I can go ahead and attach them again with the gel super glue. Pardon my head here. This is a very delicate procedure. You have to kind of go quickly, and you have to make sure that you put it in the right spot the first time, because that super glue will take hold really quickly, which can be nice, but it can also be a pain if you get it wrong. So I did this to both sides of the sleeves, and they kind of meet in the back to make it look like the seam of a jacket. And then I went around and pulled down the top of the sleeve bits and added some super glue in there so that they are touching and glued directly onto the doll itself. So now the top of the dress and the sleeves are permanently attached to the doll. And here she is. This is how the top of the dress looks. For the bottom of the dress, I still had some more work to do, and I don't know if you can tell from the video, I'm hesitating quite a bit to cut into this dress. I have put so much work and time and hand sewing that I'm very scared to cut into this dress. But it's so iconic that she has these little spiky bits coming out from the bottom of her dress that I had to do it. And so I'm taking my time and making little spikes that are going to go all the way around. And the easiest way for me to do this was to pin her dress down to the piece that I used to iron on, because otherwise that spandex just kind of has a mind of its own. Now I'm going to take some tacky glue and I'm going to put it all over the surface that I want that dollar store mesh fabric to stick to. And this is going to be a waiting game because I'm going to press it into the glue, and then I want to make sure that it is 100% completely dry before I mess with it, because I don't want to get glue on the outside of the dress or anywhere else, because it will leave a mark on the fabric. Once it's dry, I can unpin everything, and for some reason this process of gluing the mesh to the dress really kind of helps the spandex keep its shape. And this is how the bottom of the dress looks. I do end up trimming these a little bit shorter, and I think it helps with the effect. Now it's time to do Morticia's hair, and her hair is actually one of the easiest hairstyles to do. She has long hair with a part directly down the center. To start out, I'm going to use a toothpick in some tacky glue, and I'm just going to make a line across the back of her head from ear to ear, and then there's going to be glue that I add all underneath that line to the bottom of her head, like right at the top of her neck. I do have to be careful because her head moves that I don't add glue in between the head and the neck joint. Now I'm going to take some of that same black viscose that I made Gomez's hair out of, and I'm just going to gently place it on top of the glue and tap it down. This will take hold onto the tacky glue. When I first did this, I thought this is never going to hold, but it does. It holds really, really well. Now I'm taking some watered down tacky glue and a brush, and all the pieces that are sticking up, I'm going to gently brush them down so that they lay flat against her scalp. I'm going to do this same process again, just above the last hairline that I did, because I want to make sure she has plenty of hair on the back of her head. I don't want it to look like her hair is thin. So I did the same thing, laid down glue, added some hair, and then laid down the front of it with some watered down tacky glue. To start the part, I'm just going to put a line of tacky glue just to one side of her part line. And then I am going to take another amount of the black viscose, and I'm going to place it so that there's just a little bit hanging over one side and then a lot hanging over the other side. We're going to be making one side of the part at a time. So once that's kind of dried, we're going to do the same thing with the watered down tacky glue and just make sure that the short side of the head is glued down against the scalp. And so what you will have is something that looks like this, where one side is glued down. Now I'm going to go back and add some more tacky glue right where that part line is, and I'm going to flip the longer side of the hair back over that part line that we just made. This gives me one side of her head that has hair on it. The other side doesn't have anything. So this gives me one side of her part. Now I'm going to do the same exact thing for the other side of the head, and that gives me the other side of the part. And now we have a part down the middle of her head. I have to go back and I add some glue a little bit to the side of her face. This is going to keep her hair down and not just flying off in the wind. But that's pretty much it for Morticia's hairdo. It's actually a pretty simple one, but it is a little bit more difficult to tame because it is all over the place. And because she has a moving head, I can't really glue it down to her dress or anything because I want her head to stay where it's easy to move. So it's just going to be constantly trying to keep it under control. So that's it for today's video. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun putting these two together. We have one more video left in Addams Family October. It is going to be the cemetery. I usually post on Fridays, but this one is going to come out Halloween night. And so I hope you guys are excited. I know I am. It's something that's going to really complete the front of the house. Now I'm not going to include a picture of the family so far because we are still missing one family member, and I think you guys know who it is. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.